Well, welcome back to the follow-up after show, kind of our web extra for your viewers who caught the big show at 8 o'clock on Tuesday nights. And now we're going to bring our guest on again to talk a little bit more about the topic we talked about on the big show or some other things. We've got James Hohman, the Director of Fiscal Policy with the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, who's joining us again. We spent a lot of time talking about the term limit proposal on the November 8th ballots. There was one other area you wanted to get into. So talk to me a little bit that we didn't get on the big show about that.
Sure. Like, one of the most important things I think voters ought to consider is trying to, and I think we mentioned this, ensure that our elected officials are representing their constituents. And one of the things about every legislature, they try to do that. They try really hard. They try to know their district. They try to know what they feel. But you get asked to opine on a lot of things in the legislature that your voters probably don't care much about. And every legislator is allowed a certain degree of freedom in that. And some of them dig their heels on some things that their voters probably don't care much about. They'll champion things that their constituents might not be interested in. And that's fine, because we want to ensure that popular legislation gets enacted. And so a constant turnover of new people ensures that quirks don't hold up popular legislation for too long. I think that's an important effect. It's probably not going to get a lot of attention, but as someone who's been following the legislature closely since 2002, that have seen things that were politically impossible in 2002 get passed in 2012 or something like that. I think if we would have had those legislators in 2002 that were still there in 2012, we probably don't get right to work, which is an issue that I care a lot about. Now, that's speculation on my part. This is, again, like, you're still ensuring that there's new blood in the legislature. This is not getting rid of term limits. It's 12 years instead of 6, but it effectively doubles term limits for most members.
Okay. It's a good issue. We have to vote. There's 3 ballot proposals on the ballot in November. We've got one on abortion. We've got one on term limits. We've got one on voter rights. They're all important. Do your research, and they can read your brief.
Yes.
In about a week, right?
Yeah, and again, check out our brief, check out the others that are out there to try and help voters make up their mind. There's a lot of information out there. They're going to be inundated with campaign advertisements any day now on this proposal. So I hope that as they start asking questions about this, that my brief is a good source of answers for them.
Excellent. A couple other issues I want to deal with in the after show as it pertains to you. As we know, Governor Whitmer ran 4 years ago on fixing the damn road. So here we are 4 years into it. Is there proof in the pudding on that?
Yeah, I mean, for one, fixing all of the roads is a bad subject. I don't think she wanted to fix all the roads.
Right.
The goal should always have been, are we putting roads together faster than they fall apart? And the answer is no, we're not. We're not right now, and although we're close. So road funding, the state portion of it is increased from $2 billion to $3.6 billion before the governor even took her administration. And it got to this point where roads were expected to quickly deteriorate, and we were around that same level of putting the roads together, just slightly slower than they're falling apart. It should have been really easy for the governor to get us to the point where we have continual improvements year after year. But her decision to insist on tax increases in order to pay for road funding and a bunch of her other priorities derailed progress, and we kind of got stuck. The governor has acquiesced to the most recent budget, but inflation already took effect. So, one step forward, one step back on something that should have been much easier for her to fulfill, and she should have wanted to fulfill since it was her primary campaign promise.
Well, I'll say 2 things that probably worked in her favor. Probably the pandemic. I think people realized there may have some other priorities, I guess. And that's true. That was a lot on her plate. The other thing I will say is that federal infrastructure bill did pass. All the states, including Michigan, got a boatload of cash, which then I assume can infuse into the roads a little bit, right?
Yeah, but the goal is to fix roads together faster than they fall apart. A 1-year influx of cash doesn't do that unless it's going to be followed up. The federal government probably isn't going to do that. And it's the same thing with her proposal to bond in order to pay for current road repairs. That the money that's going to be used to pay for those bonds comes from fuel taxes, comes from vehicle registration taxes, money that would otherwise have been used to pay for road repair in the future. So that concentrates construction now at the expense of future construction. Doesn't get us to the point where we're fixing roads together or putting roads together faster than they fall apart. Should have been really easy. There was bipartisan agreement
Sure.
to spend more money on the roads, but this dispute over exactly how to do it derailed progress. It should have been an easy thing for the governor to accomplish, and she just didn't.
And I don't see her opponent, Tudor Dixon, hitting that just yet. She may. I hear her hitting other areas. She's not hitting that yet. Maybe she will between now and the election. We'll see about that, I guess.
Sure, but I think it's something that voters should care about. Does their governor do what she told people?
That seems to be easy, but we'll see how that plays out between now and Election Day. And another issue, state budget hasn't been approved. They kind of did it by setting aside about $7 million, which I believe, what you told me, 15% of the state's revenue. Is that right?
Yeah, the state collects between $30 and $40 billion in tax revenue each year from income taxes, sales taxes, property tax, the state's portion of property taxes, and everything else. And this, and all states have a balanced budget requirement, which means that legislators tend to get to spend as much as they get in revenue each year. And what that means around the country is that they spend every penny that they have. This year they didn't. They set aside $7 billion of revenue. It's a huge chunk of change. They may find consensus to spend that later, but I think it's also a demonstration from Republicans. There's this big dispute over whether the state can afford to lower taxes. And by setting aside a large chunk of revenue like they did, I think they're demonstrating to the governor that yes, the state can afford it, and yes, this is a priority to them. They don't need to spend as much as they have. And despite what people thought going into the pandemic, state revenues have been remarkably strong. They've ratcheted up, and revenue estimators expect that they're going to stay ratcheted up. So it's left lawmakers with a lot of resources, in addition to all the money the federal government has showered on the state. So there's a lot of money, and a lot of other states have been in this exact same situation and found that they can cut taxes.
So is there a timeline to spend this money? Is it year to year?
If you don't spend it, it just keeps growing. It stays in the savings account.
Okay. So,
I mean, as you've seen, we have a Republican legislature and a Democratic governor. That may change in November. If that's changing, then the dynamics change. But right now, the governor has not been able to agree with the Republican legislature about a lot of things.
That's a pattern. When you have a Republican House and a Republican Senate, we constantly have this yin and yang with here, right? May see it again for the next 4 years, right? I mean,
maybe. Well, we're going to find out very soon.
James Hohman, Fiscal Policy Director of the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. Thanks for joining us on The Big Show. Thanks for staying on for the after show. Great stuff. And read his brief at the Mackinac Center coming up in the next week. Good stuff. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael.
And thank you for joining us on the after show. We'll see you next week.